Hello, and welcome to another installment of At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a platform where we will learn from people who come from different walks of life, careers, and experiences, but all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of saying yes to the unexpected turns of their lives. And they are now using the power of their voice or podium to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium is the intersection of art, culture, and big thoughts wrapped up in good, old-fashioned conversation. Today, I'm thrilled and humbled to share the podium with Cassandra Worthy. With contagious energy that radiates throughout every room she steps into, Cassandra Worthy is the truly disruptive thought leader on change that companies need to build organizational resilience and adaptability. During times of major shift, such as merger, acquisitions, organizational restructuring, new systems integration, and market disruption, rarely do businesses ever face the tumultuous emotional landscape of the organization head on. This is where Cassandra steps in. She has created and cultivated the unique strategy of change enthusiasm, which is arming individuals around the world with the means to harness the power of emotion, a resource in infinite supply, to embrace and accelerate change and transformation journeys. Cassandra's message nurtures highly resilient and adaptable organizations beginning at the heart of the individual. Cassandra's client base spans the Fortune 500 and larger companies all over the world, including Proctor Gamble, Allstate, Jones Lang LaSalle, and WeWork. Cassandra, welcome to At the Podium.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was so happy that another At the Podium guest and friend, Seth Madison, connected us. That was very, very, very thoughtful on his part, because I think we share so many things in common. And I think your vision of the world and your ideas around change are really what we need right now.
Absolutely. As soon as we had our first phone call after the introduction, I was like, yo, I vibe with this man. We must have many more conversations.
We were totally vibing.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Cassandra, I think if ever there was a moment, a time for change enthusiasm, it is now. Yeah. And I would love to hear from you. What is change enthusiasm, and how do you look at it in this time of tectonic shifts in work and how work is made through this specific lens of change enthusiasm?
Yeah, for sure. So often we hear this language about having and maintaining a growth mindset, how it's so important to have a growth mindset when you're going through challenging, difficult change and disruption. But very seldomly do we hear the how. Do we see a roadmap? What is that? How do you practice a growth mindset? And so that's really what I'm striving to give with change enthusiasm. It is that growth mindset that we all really are sought after as we go through change and disruption. As you know, I'm a chemical engineer by trade. And so I thought about this in a very, very pragmatic way. And I wanted to create the roadmap for one to practice this mindset and really experience growth through any change and any disruption. So I created a 3-step mental practice, And the steps are the signal, the opportunity, and the choice. And I'll quickly break down all 3 of those steps just so you can get a flavor of how one could put this into practice. So the signal are what I see as these really difficult emotions that we often feel when we're going through really big change, really disruption, especially those types of changes that feel like they've slapped us across the face and hit us on the ground, and we crying and we can't get up and we're saying we didn't ask for this and why am I on the floor right now? So the signal is these emotions. The fact is we are emotional beings. And these emotions are real, undeniable, and we often face them when going through a lot of growth, a lot of change, and a lot of disruption. Well, this first step is about acknowledging the existence of those emotions, embracing them, allowing them to exist, and then trusting that they're there to serve you, trusting they're there to invite you into your greatest moments of opportunity to grow. And when you accept that invitation, that's when you go into the second step, the opportunity. And this is where you're like, okay, I know that I'm in a moment to grow. I'm going to evolve. I can become better today or better tomorrow than I am today. What are my options to do that? What can I do to milk this opportunity for all it's worth? And then you're ready for that last step, the choice. The choice is one of the most powerful tools we have in our arsenal of humanity. And through the power of choice, you can begin to transform all that emotional energy. You can transform any anxiety or fear into hope and anticipation, thinking about all the good that's in store and everything that you'll learn. And it's not about leaping all the way from anxiety to anticipation with just one choice. It's about making those small choices every day and every moment, those many, many decisions, many choices to get yourself to the next best feeling and really reach that better result, knowing that you are growing, you're evolving in that moment when going through that change. So yeah, it's a practice. It's a practice every day.
And I think what's really compelling about change enthusiasm, and we mentioned it, we reference it in your bio, is that it's really holding companies to task on addressing not just the merger or the acquisition that's happening, but what is the emotional impact that is having on the employees within that company who are living through it? Because so often we don't talk about that, because emotion is sometimes a bad word in the work environment. People don't cry. We're not supposed to get angry. All these human emotions that we stifle down because they're not appropriate for the work environment. But it seems like in a way you're saying, no, go there, step into that.
You got
to see
it.
what's there, and how do we fix that?
You got it. You got it. And I always, I've said before, when we say leave emotion at the door of business and of the workplace, you are in effect leaving humanity at the door, right? Because we are natural emotional beings, right? And especially when we're going through difficult, challenging change. If you don't give your employees a means, some tools, a conduit to express that emotion, to let that energy flow, then they get into the downward spiral and thinking, you know what, the grass is greener elsewhere. This is too challenging and I have to go. And that's when attrition rates go through the door. And so, yeah, in this mindset, it's about acknowledging that emotion, allowing employees to share that emotion, knowing and trusting that everyone's in this moment of opportunity, that there's a very strong vision and a mission for moving forward in this change. And together we will become better as individuals and as a business moving forward. And it's so often, when I share that I teach and I talk about change enthusiasm, people always just assume it's like this overly sugary, sweet, optimistic take on change. Be enthusiastic, rah, rah. And it's not that, right? It's not about blind positivity and blind optimism. It's really about facing those difficult emotions, exploring the thoughts that are bringing awareness into that energy, and then leveraging the power of choice to transform that emotion into fuel. Emotion is a resource. It is an infinite supply. And through the power of choice, we can make it be our fuel for our growth and the growth of our business as well.
It's amazing. Emotion is fuel for change.
Yeah, you got it.
So you didn't just stumble into the change enthusiasm solution. This concept was really cultivated in your lived experience going through a major shift in your company and having to make a decision whether you would be a part of that transition or whether you would leave during that transition. So I would love it if you could talk us through those circumstances and how the decision you made influences your work you're doing today.
Of course. Yeah, I haven't always been a change enthusiast. Let me tell you that. So yeah, I'll tell you a quick story of my very first major change challenge that I had when working. I spent 15 years working in more traditional roles of corporate and mostly at Proctor Gamble. And I transitioned into a really big acquisition that they just did, multi-billion-dollar. And I transitioned to continue delivering, really breakthrough innovation, but also to integrate parent company tools and processes into that community. And I had just assumed that it was going to be a similar business unit than I had been in before in the parent company, that, things would jive and kind of be the same and I would hit the ground running. But that was naivety, because it was like I was in a completely different business culture. I actually moved cities and I went to work in where that business had been headquartered. And I was one of very few at the time parent company employees that had transitioned in. And so it was a very us versus them type of a culture. And there were a lot of cultural differences between what I knew at Proctor and what they knew in that company. And they had also been around for decades. They were a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. And so the employees there had the mindset of, you know what, we've been doing this well for many, many years. I don't need y'all. I don't need you coming in here telling me what I need to do differently. I got this. I've been doing it for a while. And so there's a lot of this. There's a lot of tension all the way up and down the hallways. And it was really tough. It was very difficult. I felt like everything that I tried to do to present new innovation, to talk about some experiences that I had and how it could be better for that business was met with a brick wall. And I ended up reaching out to a mentor, basically just venting to her, saying, this is awful, I'm miserable, and how I was about to quit. And she told me some words that have stayed with me to this day and that have really helped me create this growth mindset. She said, Cassandra, in this moment, you can either get bitter or you can get better, and it's your choice. And her telling me those two words and putting me in that seat of power that it was my choice. It took a few days for that to really sink in and marinate, but I started to change my outlook, and I started to change knowing that, you know what, I do have a choice. I can choose how I show up in this workplace. I can choose how I experience this change. And I started engaging with folks in a different way. And I ended up making really great friends in that organization, getting myself top rated, landing another, growth opportunity that I wouldn't have had I not transitioned in. And I really started to put some nuts and bolts to this growth mindset, practicing it myself, really seeing any of that difficult emotion as a signal that, you know what, bitter or better, here it is. Here's my opportunity. I can either get better or I can get bitter and stay miserable. And I, consistently chose better.
I'm really moved by that concept of bitter or better, because I think, how often do we choose to just stay bitter? In a way, that's the easier choice, right? It's my self-righteous anger. My company was sold. The new company doesn't want to play ball. I'm just going to go home. I'm going to find a new job.
Yeah.
But I think the harder course is sometimes doing the better.
Yeah.
Maybe the more rewarding choice is doing the better.
Yeah. And oftentimes that better isn't immediate, right? So I often say one of the most important ingredients of practicing this mindset is patience. Because yes, we're going to be making those choices on a day-to-day basis and stretching to milk that opportunity, but the result isn't always going to be immediate. It's going to take some time. And every day you're going to be presented with an opportunity to get better or get better. And I certainly did in that business. And I'm not saying that when you practice this, every day is going to be cherry blossoms and roses, right? It's not. It's life, right? And you're going to have challenges, going to have difficulties. But when you can practice this, you'll likely have more better days than bad days or bitter days. And I certainly discovered that in my own personal, practice in that business. And now as I've continued to put language to this and really, sought to teach this with individuals all around the world.
It's also resonating for me because I'm in the midst of writing a book called Plans Change, wish me luck, which is really about this moment in people's lives when they have to make a transition. And I think that concept of you have to choose to be better. You have to make those choices, I think, is a critical step for people who are in moments of transitions in their lives. And I think about my own life and I go, how many times did I just choose bitter because it was an easier way to go? Or it was the convenient exit off the highway for me, versus stay in it, figure it out, embrace what is, as opposed to regretting what was or wanting what was to come back. It's almost like you're saying that life, the better is life moved forward.
Moving forward, that's it. And I was going to say, when you get to that bitter place and that's your choice, it's very stagnant, right? And I think about, as an engineer, I often think about emotion as energy. Peter McWilliams has said it first, that emotion is energy in motion. And so you think about that, if we're a closed system and emotion is energy, then we can do one of three things, right? Energy can neither be created or destroyed. We can either transfer that, and we do that through venting. We do that through complaining. We do that through talking about how horrible things are. But when we can transform through the power of choice, that's when we can really start to accelerate and move forward, right? Transforming the signature of that energy into fuel and something that's going to get us excited to step into our day, knowing that we're going to grow and become better. And of course, the other third way that we can deal with that energy is by ignoring it, by suppressing it, by conserving it. And that's when things can get a bit dangerous, because you're ignoring it, shoving it down, and then all of a sudden there's these emotional outbursts to friends, to family, to people who don't deserve it, because you're ignoring those emotions. Yeah.
So you referenced being an engineer a couple of times, and it seemed that training, that STEM training, seems to shape a lot of the work that you're talking about. If ever there was an area that was not the domain of people of color or women in the STEM category, it has traditionally been a boys' club. I'm curious, how did you put a crack into that glass ceiling?
Yeah. So I have to say that I have an incredible family, and I have wonderful parents that have taught me from when I was very young that I can do and be anything that I want. And so I've always had that seed, that gumption, and it's something that I carry with me today. And I think it's a huge part of the success that I've seen. But for me, when I was in the 4th grade, I saw Dr. Ben Carson accept an award for being the first to separate Siamese twins from the brain, a neurosurgeon. And he was sharp. He was well-spoken. I looked up how much neurosurgeons made. He was well paid. And so from that moment in the 4th grade, I told myself, I'm going to be a pediatric neurosurgeon. From that day until sophomore year at Georgia Tech in college, if anyone asked me, what are you going to do? I was going to be a neurosurgeon. And I love the idea of that, not only because I had that exposure to Ben and seen what was possible with someone who looked like me to do really well in the world of science, but I also have always had an insatiable curiosity. And I always tell folks that science and math, I think, found me because they've armed me with these tools to answer so many of my questions and this curiosity that I just have for life, right? And so neurosurgery fit in a lot of different ways. But it was a sophomore year of school when I kind of turned that curiosity within and started talking to that little 4th grader that I still had inside me, asking, why do you want to become a neurosurgeon? Because I looked at what it would take, right? Got to finish bachelor, got to do, 4 years of medical school, 9 to 11 years of residency. And I'm like, I was already a little tired of school by this point. And so I was like, you know what? I could pivot. I could switch from pre-med biology to chemical engineering and still get a really well-paying job out of school, still able to solve problems and feed that curiosity. And so that's what kind of helped me make the shift and the pivot to get into engineering. And I never really looked back. And I often tell people that as engineers, truly, you're taught how to think, right? We are rock star problem solvers. That's what engineers are all about. And we take the principles, the dynamics that we learn at university to apply them to some of the world's most complex problems.
I really love the concept of science in this field, because I think oftentimes the critical thinking that you have to be a scientist in that specific way can often reinforce the emotional component that we were talking about earlier. So you look at a scientist like Newton, who his 3rd law, that for every action,
yes,
there's an opposite reaction.
Yeah.
It's sort of, you look at those things that are really sort of fundamental to the human experience and sort of fundamental to how we treat each other. And a lot of it is scientifically proven. So it's not just a theory of how we feel. There are laws in nature, there are laws in science, there are laws in physics that support change, support bitter versus better, that supports how we treat each other on the planet today. It's scientific. It's not just, oh, I feel this way. It's actually, no, it's part of the law of nature.
Yeah, there's definitely hard science behind this, and the idea of resiliency as a muscle, and the idea of the power of practicing a growth mindset. You are literally transforming the chemistry of your brain. You are literally rewiring synapses and pathways so that when you're presented with these difficult emotions, when you feel that vibration within, you are then ready to know this is a signal. I'm in an invitation to grow. I'm in my opportunity. What can I do in this moment? And the more that you practice it, those pathways become worn in, they become well grooved, and it becomes a lot easier. And that's why I talk about resiliency as a muscle, right? And we can only build it through the practice of experiencing change and going through this mindset. And there's some people doing some exceptional work, really creating the scientific principles and foundation behind this resiliency as a muscle, behind the power of practicing a growth mindset. Folks like Susan David, like a good friend of mine, Amy Brand over in the UK, just doing some incredible work, really presenting the science behind all of it, which of course just lights me up.
Right.
So, yeah.
When you were talking about your educational journey, so when you were going through your education and beginning your career and putting chips in those glass ceilings, did you have an awareness of what the optics meant of you being in the room? And I ask this because oftentimes people who are firsts, people who are trailblazers can sometimes feel tokenized in the areas that they are changing the narratives for. And I wonder how you would speak to that in your own career.
I'll be honest and say, certainly when I was in my engineering classes, I was one of very, very few women. And I was probably the only Black female in my chemical engineering classes. Thankfully, when I go back to the school, to Georgia Tech, I see that demographic has changed. But I was certainly the one, a Black female, and then definitely a small number of other females. And in college, that didn't really dawn on me that was happening, right? And for those folks who know me, I am very much so a glass half full, very optimistic, seeing the good in all type of a person. And it really wasn't until I got into corporate and I started to engage with the African-American affinity groups, the other affinity groups, really understanding the dynamics at play within the business and the corporate landscape to elevate us, to make sure our voices are being heard, to make sure that we're being represented across every level in the organization. And that's when I really started to think more about the importance and the power of being in the room, the importance and power of building the room and inviting people into it. And so I've really stepped into that, I think, in a big way, especially given now that I'm invited onto these platforms, talking to senior leaders, C-suite executives. I'm in the room with these CEOs. And I really feel that it's incumbent upon me to share my perspective and bring my full authentic self into the work that I do. And I often tell folks that in corporate, there became a point where I would be in a boardroom and see that either I'm the only woman or I'm the only person of color. And I loved it. I loved it because whether you like it or not, there is a spotlight on you. There is a light shining on you. And you can step into that light and choose how you show up in that spotlight. And so I got jazzed about it. I'm like, you know what? They're already looking at me. So let me give them some real flavor. Let me give them some powerful perspective. And make sure that my voice is heard at this table with the spotlight on me, being the only person of color in the room. So yeah, I often invite folks who feel that way, that I'm the only one. There's a light shining on you. So why don't you share your light that you have to give to the world in that moment?
That is so powerful. I read this wonderful book, and the author's name has, of course, left my mind because I'm talking to you in real time. It's called Inclusify, which is about diversity, equity, and inclusion within the corporate environment. And the author, she details how oftentimes people won't even want to sit on a board if they're the only person of color, or if they're the only woman, because they don't want to feel tokenized. And I think what you're saying, I 100% support, is that you're there, be heard, we're here, get used to it, and own the spotlight in a way that's, of course, respectful and all of that kind of stuff. It's not about showboating. It's about stepping into the space that you're lucky enough to occupy and being, sometimes you do represent the race or the gender or the thing, and you have to just step into that and own it. You may be the first person that a board has had that's a woman.
Yeah.
Which is frightening, but true.
Yeah, and it's true. And in many ways, when you're thinking about really big change and how it happens, not only the changes that we make in our own lives, you think about people who have been on a weight loss journey, lost 100 pounds. It started with 1 pound. It started with 1 pound and kind of cascaded from there. And so right, wrong, or indifferent, sometimes these types of tectonic shifts, as you said before, these big changes start with the one, right? And it's important that you step into that knowing, okay, I am the start of something, and I'm going to build the momentum and make sure that the right values are being instilled around this table so that one day I'm gonna look up and I'm not the only one. I'm definitely not the only one. So help instill that value and build and grow that momentum and step into being that first pound that's going to lead to so many more.
Hey, we're going to come back to pounds in a minute.
Yeah, sure.
I watched your TEDx, Pearl Street, so we're going to talk about pounds in a minute.
Okay.
I wanted to talk to you also about this idea of culture, because I think that is a word that has really taken on a whole life of its own in the past 10 years. Companies talk about, this is our corporate culture. This is what we believe in. And I'm going to refer to Inclusify again, because it's echoed in your website that sometimes culture is not the best thing for your business. And that really struck me again when I was reading about what you do, because I think not a lot of people are saying that right now, that we need to examine this idea of culture fits, because that can sometimes be the impediment to change adoption. Can you speak to that?
Of course, yeah. And I'm okay with culture being a part of the conversation, because I do think that it's an important aspect as you think about, accelerating change, as you think about sustaining change. But it's important that we drill it down, and that we don't just glaze over and put everything in a culture bucket. So for me, I like to really dive into what is culture? What makes that? And for me, culture is manifested through the behaviors, the actions, and the words of the people who are comprised in that organization or that company. And then if you think about even further, what's driving that behavior and those words and those actions? It's our thoughts, right? It's our thoughts, and notably the thoughts we keep thinking. The thoughts we keep thinking. Said another way, our beliefs, right? So at the core of culture is belief, and the accelerant on that is the emotional energy, right? So emotions and belief are really what is the root of culture. And for me, if you can get the beliefs right, the beliefs that you want to uphold, that you want individuals' hearts and minds to maintain, culture is the byproduct. Culture is the byproduct. If you can get crystal clear on, here's what we believe in, here's what we see as a personal truth, as a truth for this organization and this business, and here are the behaviors that embody that belief, culture will happen. That culture that you strive for should happen. And of course, you got to do some, iteration loops to make sure you have those right behaviors identified, but drill it down to belief, drill it down to that emotional energy that, again, is the fuel, to fuel that culture. So I think oftentimes that's why culture change can be so slow, because people aren't diving right into, here are the core beliefs, here are the behaviors that I think need to make this culture that I want to move forward in. And then getting leaders, all the role models in the organization on board so that they're role modeling that behavior. Because so often, the thoughts that we keep thinking, they are, they happen either because of communication that we see, because of interactions that we have with our peers, with our managers, and the behaviors that we see around us. And so often, I have not my clients, but some other companies that I know that say they have a certain type of culture, but when you're in the walls, they're behaving very differently than what the culture says on the wall. And so you have to make sure that that behavior is congruent with the culture that you're actually striving for.
Is there a difference between culture and values?
Yes. So I would relate value more so to belief, right? So value is something that I hold as a truth, something that I see to be important, right? So I think of value and belief being the driver that manifests culture. So I wouldn't make value and culture synonymous. Rather, I would put value more in tune with the beliefs that you uphold.
So we've talked a lot in this first sort of 20 minutes about business, but I'm making a ton of corollaries and parallels to my personal life. And I wonder, change enthusiasm is obviously a great tool for business. And it's also sounding to me like a great tool for one's life, how one chooses to move through the world, because it's about perspective and it's about how you handle change and the choices you make. And I wonder if there are parts of your life where change enthusiasm came into play.
Oh my goodness, yes. And I get that question a lot during my Q&A sessions. Can we practice this in our personal lives or just at work? I was like, emotions exist whether you're working or not. There is always opportunity to practice change enthusiasm. But yes, of course, I've had lots of opportunity to practice this. Probably the biggest for me has been my journey into sobriety, and embracing my alcoholism, and stepping into sobriety full force. I think that had allowed me to really put pedal to the metal and see what this mindset was all about. Because you talk about fear, you talk about anger, you talk about frustration, having to embrace the fact that for me, the healthier choice for me is that I keep the drink on the table, that I don't take one sip of a drink. That is the most healthy choice for me. But having spent so many years where that was my normal, there was a lot of frustration, a lot of anger about that, and a lot of denial. But in the practice of change enthusiasm, I was able to see that, you know what, this is a big opportunity for me. I'm feeling all these signaling emotions. I'm in this moment of opportunity to say yes to my alcoholism, to embrace sobriety, and to step forward and become better tomorrow than I am today. And of course, in sobriety, it's all about one day at a time. And truly in life, in humanity, we can only live one day at a time, right? It's the only thing that's possible. But yeah, every day becoming a little bit better, growing, evolving, and learning about me, and learning about how can I contribute to the world in the best way.
Saying yes to alcoholism, what is that? Because
what is that?
Yeah.
For me, it was freedom. For me, it was freedom. I cannot tell you how much time I spent when living in my alcoholism, thinking about what I'm going to drink, drinking, recovering from drinking, and then making sure everything was in place so that I could be ready to drink once more. So when I stopped drinking, the amount of clarity that I felt and the amount of time that I had in a given day at first was overwhelming and expansive. And I did not know what to do with myself. But the more that I stepped into that, knowing that I'm in this opportunity, I'm going to become better each and every day as I stick with this, having said yes to my alcoholism, it allowed a great level of freedom, and it allowed my curiosity to run rampant. And I'm already, like I said, having insatiable curiosity. But prior to embracing my alcoholism, it was all externally focused, right? Curious about the world, solving problems. Well, in that, I got curious about me. I got curious about me and asked a lot of why questions to myself. And then I discovered authors like Michael Singer, like Gary Zukav, like Thomas More, and just filled up, my spirit, and really started to, find some answers for myself about why I'm here. What are my natural gifts and my talents? And how can I share this? How can I be a vessel of this divine light and have it shine as brightly as I can around the world? And that really what set me on a crazy trajectory when I did that.
You said earlier that you come from a very supportive family.
Yes.
Do you know why you drank? Were you able to figure that out? If you had a familiar support in place, one could possibly think, well, that person wouldn't have a need to drink. But I know I'm being very reductive here, and my people drink. But
no, it's completely fine, and I appreciate the question, so we can shed light, at least on my perspective of my journey.
Correct.
But yeah, so actually, both of my parents are recovering alcoholics as well, and so I do think there was a genetic disposition that was there. And the other thing specific for me, when I really started getting into my drinking career full-fledged and really started excelling in that career, was when I was really coming into my own, coming into my sexuality, my queerness, stepping into, who I am as a person. And there was a lot of vulnerability that could have happened, but the alcohol gave me some courage, gave me kind of, that pump my chest out a little bit so that I could step into being me, being queer, in a way where I felt more comfortable. And since it was at that time when I was first coming into being myself, I couldn't really feel comfortable in my own skin without the drink. And so it became kind of a necessity. If I'm going to be me, I'm going to show up and I'm going to be bright, vibrant Cassandra. Where's the drink? Where's the drink? And so, yeah, that continued. But, astonishingly and gratefully, I was still able to maintain my professional career and excel at that as well, which, I had a lot of fun and really, really enjoyed the learning, the growth that I experienced in corporate as well. But it's like I was doing both these careers, drinking and my professional life at the same time. And the drinking was feeling a lot faster, a lot faster at some points than the professional career. But yeah, I think it was the genetic disposition as well as my coming into striving to be comfortable in my own skin and finding that alcohol gave me some armor and a sense of courage to do that.
Yeah, my stepfather was an alcoholic, and he was a functional alcoholic. So when he was drinking, he could keep a job, he could do all the things he was supposed to do for the most part. But when he got sober, he literally could not exist in the world as a truly, he was a successful person, but something shifted the minute he stopped drinking, and he couldn't work at the level that he was working at before. He couldn't provide at the level that he was providing before, and that may have nothing to do with him being sober or not. I mean, I don't know what was inside his interior life, but it's interesting because you almost said your career was going along. It wasn't going along as fast as your drinking career, but your career was going on. So I'm always, whenever I think about alcoholism, I think about him because the inverse happened. He got clean, he got sober, but the work-life piece of him did not ever truly come back in a truly impactful way. And it was always interesting for me to watch that.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. The more that I learned about the disease, the more that I learned about myself, there's something called, I think it's an environmental learned skill. And for me, it was pool, right? Shooting billiards. When I was drinking, I was good. I was good at shooting pool. And it became this learned skill that I only knew when I was drinking. When I was sober, I was horrible, horrible at it. So I understand that. I can relate because in some ways it became understood. This is how I show up to work. This is how I'm able to do it because of this condition, because of this state that I'm in, I'm able to do it. You take that away, I'm no longer in that condition. I'm lost. I don't know how I'm supposed to be. And there was some small part of that in my early days of sobriety, but thankfully I hadn't gotten yet to the point where I was consistently in that state of intoxication. There were ebbs and flows, but there were certainly, many, many days throughout the week where, I was indeed sober. So I think that helped me. I think it made it so I could find a way to be me, to be comfortable in this skin, to share my authentic light, my power, in full sobriety. And I know that I would not be here talking to all of you in this moment if it wasn't for my saying yes to the fact that I am an alcoholic and stepping fully into my sobriety and the tremendous clarity that it's afforded me.
And thank goodness, right?
Thanks for saying that.
Thank goodness.
But yes.
In your TEDx that you did for Pearl Street, you referenced the alcoholism, and you also talked about how you lost 50 pounds. And I that so struck me because the two addictions that we all live with in this country in some capacity is either alcohol, drugs, sex, or food.
Yep.
And I think, we're all food obsessed. We're probably all food addicted to some degree, and to be able to lose that amount of weight, I think that really struck me in your conversation just about who you are as a person and what you can accomplish. How were you able to even do that?
Yeah, I think that was a waterfall effect. So, in sobriety, I started reading all about habits. How do we develop them? What are they all about? And I think for me, the alcoholism was what they call a keystone habit, something that was really at the core of the way that I operate. When that habit changed, all the other habits that I had, it was that much easier to change them. And also, if you just think about alcohol in general and what you're doing, that's caloric intake. And when I'm having a drink, I also like to have some fried food and like to have even more calories. So I think that, once the drink got put down, I wasn't having nearly as many calories anyway, because I wasn't in that state of intoxication. But yeah, when you can shift a really, really big core habit that you had, that keystone habit, and for me, it was drinking, a lot of the other habits can change a lot easier because it's almost like you create a blueprint. And again, you're rewiring your brain. And as that brain gets rewired, it becomes ready and has a higher propensity to change other pathways as well. And so I think that it was, all that weight loss was a kind of a byproduct of that habitual change and really striving to just transform my life.
Mm. Where did this all come from? Who influences you in your life? Because it's powerful.
Yeah. So I will say the strongest seed, and I alluded to it earlier, it really came from my mom, who told me I can do and be anything that I want. I can do and be anything that I want in this life. And that truly has stuck with me. It is something that is a personal truth, is a belief. It is a certain knowing in the very core of who I am. And so that allows me to step into any room with a level of confidence, knowing that I'm going to be me fully, authentically, and then let the chips fall where they may. But it allowed me and enabled me to stretch for really big goals, to stretch towards a vision, knowing that I had the power to manifest it. So I think that has really been the core and the key guide behind all of it. I will also say that the reading that I did when I first entered into sobriety, and I've always, again, had this curiosity, spirituality has always interested me, but I never really got into it in earnest because it's drinking time. But in sobriety, I really, really dove into a spiritual journey and a spiritual pursuit. And so, like I said, Gary Zukav, Michael Singer, Oprah has been a huge inspiration, as she is to millions. But I'll tell you why. A lot of people say Oprah's so inspiring. I'll tell you why she is for me. I think I see her as someone who stepped into being herself and being herself fully, knowing what she was naturally and uniquely gifted at, and staying in that lane and excelling. And I think that there's a power in that when we can recognize what that special innate gift is within us and let that light start shining, we can really, really lighten up, right? We really, really get bright when that happens. And I think that she inspired me to strive for that in my own self, to strive for my lane, to identify what that is for me, and to step into my full authentic power as big and as fully as I can. That's why she's a huge inspiration for me. And so often, you hear people say, you remind me of Oprah, you're the next Oprah, not necessarily saying it's me, but you hear that. And it's like, I don't want to be that. Oprah is who she is, and she's incredible. No one else can be that. You know what? I can be the best Cassandra Worthy on the planet. No one else can be Cassandra Worthy like I can. And so to step into that power has been huge for me and hugely inspirational. And the other thing that I'll say about points of inspiration that have been in my life and continue to be, I keep talking about this idea of authenticity and how important it is for me to be my full authentic self, really remaining true to the core essence of me. And so whenever I feel someone fully bringing their authentic power, comfortable in their own skin, their own flavor, their style, that is a point of inspiration for me. I love going down to my favorite coffee house. All the baristas in my favorite coffee house in Atlanta inspire me every day because they're full selves each and every day. And for me, that is truly an inspiration. And no, you can do that from wherever you sit. From wherever you sit, get comfortable in your own skin, bring that full authentic light, staying true to your essence, and you never know who you're inspiring. You never know who you can inspire by doing that.
Oh. That is the perfect word to end on. Sandra, I cannot thank you enough for your time today. I'm truly humbled and grateful for your time. I'm going to watch this one a lot. I want to go back and take notes.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for being you. I know you're shining your authentic light and you're moving thousands, if not millions of folks. So please keep doing what you're doing. Keep being you. And thank you so much for letting me share a bit of time with you and all the listeners.
Thank you so much. And to those of you who are watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely.